Ezzy is an economist with CoreLogic. CoreLogic is Australia's leading property data provider. Caitlin, welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me.
Pleasure. We have seen an uptick in the number of properties being sold at auction. Does the data support that?
Yeah, so looking over the past couple of years, auction activity across the broader Brisbane region has averaged between sort of 140 to 230 auctions, fluctuating through different times of the year. So peaking in as we lead up to Easter, cooling off throughout winter, and then peaking again towards the end of the year. Now, over the past couple of years, we have seen a little bit of an uptick in the proportion of properties taken to auction. So taking a slice of auction activity over overall sales, historically has sat at around the 6% mark. But throughout that COVID surge through 2021 and 2022, it reached around sort of the 7 to 8% mark. It is easing off a little bit, back to around that about 7% mark. But we are seeing a few extra auctions every week compared to historical averages.
And how many properties would you say are selling at auction in Queensland?
So from the properties taken to auction, the weekly clearance rate across Brisbane has averaged around 55% over the past sort of 5 years or so. Over the past sort of the past 3 months, the beginning of the year, we have actually seen that rise to an average of around 65%. So we are seeing a bit of early year exuberance that isn't what we were expecting to see. This sort of time last year, at the end of last year, auction clearance rates across Brisbane were sitting around that 50% range. So a bit better than what we were expecting to see coming into the year. If we zoom back and look at post-auction success though, when you look at properties that have sold within 8 weeks of, say, a failed auction, that success rate does jump up to around the 80% mark. And if taken another step back to that 16 weeks post-auction to about the 85% mark.
Yeah, because sometimes I think we measure the success of an auction through if there is a successful bidder on the day. But what we know is that sometimes it won't sell at the auction, but it sells quite quickly thereafter.
Yeah, and given that the auction campaign tends to be quite concentrated, quite targeted, we like to think of that as a successful auction result because it did sell as a result of that campaign.
And in terms of the success rate of auction sales in Queensland, how do we compare with the rest of the country?
So looking across some of the other major capitals, so markets like Sydney and Melbourne, they tend to see a higher proportion of properties taken to auction, so between sort of 20 and 25%. So Sydney's auction clearance rate is typically held around sort of the 65 to 70% mark. Melbourne's around that sort of 65% mark over the past couple of months. So they are seeing more properties sort of sold under the hammer, and that might be because of a sort of more broader cultural acceptance of auctions. We tend to be in Queensland a fairly private treaty heavy market. That's what buyers tend to know, and so we do see Brisbane record a lower clearance rate compared to, say, Melbourne or Sydney. But so far this year, Brisbane is tracking in line with Melbourne.
Yeah, that's good to hear. We know that Sydney and Melbourne tend to be more traditional auction markets, but I think there is a degree of familiarity that's starting to emerge here in Queensland. And Caitlin, I have to ask you the question that is on everyone's lips when it comes to an auction, and that is, do we see any evidence that going to auction helps you to achieve a higher selling price on the day?
Yeah, we do. So looking at historical median sales price for overall sales across broader Brisbane compared to the median sales price of an auction sale, it does typically tend to track around 50% higher. So if the median sales price across Brisbane is $750,000, then your auction median sale is probably about $1.1 million. So So there's a couple of reasons for that. Obviously, being at an auction, you have a much higher chance of getting the best possible price for a property as people put forward their best possible offer, but also the type of properties that tend to go to auction. So it tends to be your more premium markets, your more lifestyle properties that go under the hammer, and they naturally fetch a higher price.
Yeah, I think that's the beauty of the auction process. It creates a very competitive market. If you've got at least two people wanting to secure it, we've all seen what can happen. And of course, the other question that we have, you are CoreLogic, the leading data provider here in Queensland when it comes to property. So tell us, what kind of research should someone do before going to an auction, and what should they be thinking about in preparation for that experience?
Yeah, so first and foremost, obviously getting your finances in order. The auction is an unconditional sale, so there's no subject to finance clauses, and often a fairly substantial deposit is required on the day or in the next business day. Outside of making sure that you're ready to bid and know what your upper limits are, understanding what's happening in the broader market. So CoreLogic has a really great free interactive tool called Mapping the Market, which looks at around 4,000 different suburbs, house and unit prices across the country. So you can see what the median house or median unit value for that market is doing, as well as values more broadly, keeping in mind that obviously an auction is going to come in at that upper cusp of those prices, and also understanding what's happening in the broader monetary and property market. So we have a lot of great research on our CoreLogic News webpage, so on the news tab at CoreLogic.com.
Yeah, that's great, because I know a lot of people feel very fearful about what they should offer. So I think doing your research on the value of the property is absolutely of key importance. And just finally, get your crystal ball out. Tell us a little bit about what you're predicting for the future of the Queensland property market.
Yeah, so the Queensland market is still seeing quite strong value growth. So on the 3 months to February, values across Brisbane rose but just under 3%, around 2% across the broader regional market, which when you compare to markets like Sydney and Melbourne, is really quite a strong growth for the past 3 months. That has eased off a little bit from the growth we were seeing in the middle of last year. Arguably because the affordability advantage that Queensland has traditionally offered has been eroded thanks to that strong growth. But we are still seeing quite strong growth moving forward.
I think it's really important to keep in mind that phenomenal accelerated growth we experienced in that COVID period. So of course, it's understandable that we're now seeing perhaps more modest movements. So thanks so much for that great information, Caitlin.
Thanks for having me.
Hi, I'm Antonia Mercorella, CEO of the Real Estate Institute of Queensland. Thanks so much for watching this video, which is a segment from PropIQ, a show produced by the REIQ to help provide insights into real estate for both people in the industry and consumers. I'd love it if you could subscribe to our channel, and don't forget to click the notification bell. That way you'll get notified whenever we post a new video. Speaking of new videos, you might want to check out this one next.